The heritage group started before the courthouse was actually up and running. We met to research the actual history of the building, and with lots of help from Otley Museum and a trip to Wakefield, we found a whole pile of materials, the plans, the building costs and things like that. From that sprung an oral history project. With help from the West Yorkshire Archive Service and a lottery grant for recording equipment, we went out and interviewed people who had some connection with the courthouse. These were a whole range of people, solicitors, barristers, magistrates, probation officers, and we were even lucky enough to get one or two people who were prosecuted here. These then resulted in the production of a website, which is well worth visiting, display boards showing some of the biggest stories that we'd recorded, and our book. We were immensely proud of our book. It took an entire summer to collate all the anecdotes and stories that came from the oral history, to decide what format we were going to put the book in, the kind of illustrations we wanted, exactly which stories we wanted, because we have so much material. We've got lots of illustrations in here, actual pictures of the courthouse, pictures that we found from the archives. These are some of the police officers who worked here. And then we've got odd pictures in here, like this tomato. I'm sorry, I'm not telling you the story of the tomato. You'd have to find the book or look on the website. We still carry on. We produce leaflets, a timeline, which you might have heard about, and the Inspector Warburton board. Recently, we've taken these oral histories and woven them into QR codes so you can give yourself a self-guided tour of the courthouse. And we make films like the one you're watching now.
Born in Hunslet on the 25th of February 1921, John William Wainwright left school at 15 and served as a rear gunner in Lancaster bombers during the Second World War. In 1947, he joined the West Riding Constabulary as a police constable, and while serving as a policeman, he went back to studying in his spare time. After 7 years, in 1956, he gained a degree in law. Initially, he wrote articles for the Police Review on legal aspects of policing and criminal law. However, by the early 1960s, incidents and characters from his police career were supplying material that he would later incorporate into his novels. John Wainwright joined the Harrogate Writers' Circle and was particularly critical of what he considered to be badly written crime novels. He claimed that the authors didn't know how coppers talked and hadn't a clue about the sheer chaos of a genuine murder inquiry. He figured that he could do as well, probably much better. John Wainwright served in the West Yorkshire Constabulary for 20 years, the last year being at the police station here in Otley. Wainwright's first novel, Death in Sleeping City, was accepted by Collins Crime Club and published in 1965. But he was told by a senior police officer that coppers aren't allowed to write books. Get that rubbish back before it gets printed. Undeterred, the fact more determined than ever to pursue his vocation, rather after the success of his first book, Wainwright resigned from the West Yorkshire Police Force the following year and devoted himself to writing full-time. As well as producing a home security manual and numerous articles, essays, 7 radio plays, and writing a column in the Northern Echo, Wainwright became a prolific author of crime novels and was acclaimed by fellow writers such as Georges Simenon. Wainwright also wrote autobiographical accounts of his time in the RAF and serving in the police force. During his 30-year writing career, which extended between 1965 and his death in 1995, Wainwright produced some 83 books, 4 of which were published under his pen name of Jack Ripley. Although his books are now out of print, Leeds Central Library's local history section has extensive holdings of Wainwright's work, both fiction and memoir, which are available to consult as reference copies. His personal archive, as yet uncatalogued, is held at the University of Leeds Library Special Collections. Wainwright always led a very private life, almost never giving interviews and rarely appearing in public, whilst enjoying a steady, if not spectacular, success in his lifetime. As a consequence of this, his name is all but forgotten. John Wainwright died in Blackpool on the 19th of September 1995, a few months after the publication of his last novel. His death went completely unrecorded by newspapers and reference books until 2003, and critical assessment of his huge output is still yet to come. Wainwright once stated, "I count myself as a very lucky man. Reviewers once described me as a policeman who wrote books, but now they describe me as a crime novelist who was once a policeman."
This is a short history about how Otley Courthouse became the location for the police station in the series Heartbeat. Peter Walker wrote a series of books under the pseudonym of Nicholas Ray, based on 1960s policing in North Yorkshire. The series started with the title Constable, the first one being Constable on the Hill. These were not published for quite a number of years. It was only after Peter Walker met, by chance, Keith Richardson, a drama producer, that an option was taken out by YTV to use the Constable series. But time passed and nothing happened until April 1992, when the first episode was produced and shown on YTV. They were based here in Otley, because when they were looking around for a location and knew that the Whitby police station had been demolished, which was described in the series of books, Otley was identical to that location. So they chose this, as it was no longer a police station, it was empty, a new station having been built. What they used was the outside of the building, and you can still see the cells upstairs, you can see the bars on the windows, and on the left-hand side would have been the entrance to it. Internally, they used the sergeant's room, which had a radio system for getting in touch with the divisional headquarters in Leeds, the charge room, an interview room, and the courtroom. Outside, you would have seen a bicycle, which was used in order that the constables could get to an incident more rapidly than walking, and the kennels for the stray dogs were over the road. Internally, the cells, which now you can see when you visit the courthouse, were also used. This continued for some time, but eventually there was a studio free in Leeds, which they then used and constructed a replica of the internal workings of the courthouse. But the other item that was used was a police constable's house. Here in Otley, it is a superintendent's house, which is much larger. And therefore they had to look around, and they found one in Asquith. All the police constables' houses were replicas, so that they could easily be transferred from one location to another. The series continued, and the final one was filmed in 2010. The title Heartbeat came about from a change in the content of the books. Not only the location of the police station from the city to North Yorkshire, but also the occupation of the police constable's wife. She was a GP, and they could then have two lines of stories from the medical to the constables, the policing. And the name of the series then became Heartbeat. When the series was recorded, the room behind me was the courtroom, and it would have had a bench where the magistrate or the judge had to sit, and there would have been a dock where the person being charged would have to stand. And the balcony would have been where the public were able to observe the proceedings.
My name is John Ellis. I've been involved in the courthouse for about 7 years now. I started out volunteering, working mainly in the cafe. Through my involvement with that, I learned about the existence of a writers' group which met every Friday, and I was persuaded to join this. This enabled me to achieve my ambition of becoming a published writer, because I've been interested in writing crime fiction for many years, and I'd tried to get my books published using the conventional methods, getting an agent or a publisher, without success. But people in the writers' group knew how to self-publish. So I took my first 2 crime novels and went through that process. And they were successful, and I was fortunate to get a contract with Amazon Fiction. All my crime novels are set in Yorkshire, mostly in rural areas, in many different landscapes that we've got in this area. I've been fascinated by crime fiction from quite a young age. I remember devouring all the Sherlock Holmes stories and then watching dramatisations of Agatha Christie stories on the television, the Poirot and Miss Marple. I've also been fascinated by puzzles right through my life. And there was a very, very interesting series on the BBC a few years ago called Jonathan Creek, which combined this idea of an impossible crime with crime fiction. So this is what I'm trying to recreate in my stories. A lot of them have this impossible crime or locked room mystery element to them. And also the settings are very important. I get a lot of feedback from customer reviews saying, oh, I love the way you describe the landscapes. I was born in Yorkshire, makes me want to go back. It's a very important feature. I've tried to use, say, mostly rural settings, small towns, up in the Dales, something in Nidderdale, in Calderdale. And I have a core of characters who go through the series, the Chief Inspector Allroyd and his detective sergeants, plus their families. Each mystery is a separate part of a series, but they do stand separately. If people are wondering, what advice I would give to someone who's aspiring to be a writer, I'm not just talking about crime fiction here, but any kind of writing. First of all, you have to enjoy it. Think of it as a creative kind of play. Don't make a burden out of it. On the other hand, I think you do need a certain amount of discipline to say, I'm going to write some each day. This is a very common piece of advice, but it is important, I think, to keep writing, even if it's only a few hundred words each day, rather than saying, well, I won't do anything at all this week and I'll do a lot more next week. That tends to be put off and then you never get down to it. Very important to me has been being a member of a writers group, because in a writers group you bring along your work and people look at it. It's easy as a writer to become isolated and very kind of precious and protective about your work, and you do need to show it to other people to get them to comment. But I also write other things in the writers group, and all the time I think your style is improving and your imagination becomes more fertile. For each mystery, I start out with the answer, if you like, to the puzzle. I know who's committed the crime, and it's a question of working backwards So my task is to create the other suspects, the red herrings. I also know how the crime's been committed. I tend to leave that as a puzzle for the readers to try to work out, and don't reveal that until near the ending. I write a first draft, and then the whole novel goes through quite a detailed editing process. We start out with what's known as a structural editor, who will go through and suggest ways in which maybe certain characters could be developed in more detail. Certain scenes might need to be reduced. Other things might need to be developed. Then it goes to a copy editor, and their task is to make sure that everything's completely consistent throughout the story. And then the final stage where we go to a proofreader. We're going to pick up all the spelling and punctuation errors. So it's quite a rigorous process. It takes me about 9-10 months to write, and it will be 3 or 4 months of editorial process to get it into the final form for publication. You have to enjoy it.
My name's Steve Stringwell, possibly one of the last sitting magistrates that used to sit here in Otley. But in them days it was known as the Otley Pudsey bench. Now everything is transferred through to Leeds. I was a magistrate from 1992. I was appointed to the bench, and I've had now 32 years service, and now presently sitting in the Leeds court doing both youth court, Crown Court and Court of Appeal, that is, and obviously the adult court. Why did I become a magistrate in the first place? It was something that I've always been interested in. It was something that you could put something back into the community. Bearing in mind, way back in 1992, it was a local bench, so local magistrates dealt with local matters. At Otley Court, we would sit here at 10 o'clock on the Friday. We would usually get here for about 9:30, 9:45. Then, time permitting, we would sit in the retiring room, which I've noticed is now known as the roving room. We had a kettle there, but it only had an 18-inch cord on it, so when you made a cup of tea in them days, you had to reach down on the floor, fill it with water and put it back up again. On one occasion I had to go sit at the Weatherby Court to do some motoring matters. They had like a 3-foot cord on theirs, and it was up on the desk, so I thought I'd gone up market when I went down to the Weatherby Court. But Otley, no, we were the poor relations. We would sit at 10 and a bench of 3, and one fellow magistrate who was no longer with us, which was Colin Johnson. He used to have a business down Pool Road, down by the Coleman Tyres place. And Colin always was very busy, but always late. And there was many a time we would open the door and look down the road to see if he was on his way. And 9 times out of 10, at 3 minutes to 10, you'd see Colin coming up there like Roadrunner with his jacket flying and rushing with his briefcase. As regards the layout of the courtroom, over on my right here is the door which led into court number 1. What would do, you go through that door, and there were 3 steps which went up onto a bench which was about 4 foot up in the air, say, and you'd have along there a long bench where you could do your writing, but there was also between 3 and 6 seats, so that you'd have the bench of 3, chairman in the centre, and then the other seats were there if the licensing committee was sitting. From memory, when I look back now, on the left-hand side would be a box where the alleged defendant would sit or stand. There would also then be sitting down just in front of there the solicitor who would be representing them. And then on the other side you would have the Crown Prosecution who were going to prepare the case, and then you would have any of their trainees. And also further back you then would have people from social services, as they call now, or the probation people would be there and to be called upon. And then further back then it would be like a public area where people would sit if they wanted to watch and see what was going on. But I must admit, I don't really think the gallery was ever used. It was only people sitting down on the bottom. You had to give an undertaking to the Lord Chancellor in those days, which is still the same, that if you were appointed as a magistrate, that you would sit a minimum of 26 sittings a year. The good thing about what we had here in Otley in them days was that when a solicitor came from Leeds or was been in court, he was here to do the work in Otley. And it was also very popular with the lady ushers and the lady solicitors and lady magistrates for that, because on a Friday, what do we have over the road but Otley Market? And they used to all love going over the road and doing the shopping for the weekend. So Otley was always a popular place, but once you were here, all the work was done, over and done with very quickly. The car park outside was just for the magistrates to park. What would happen is that the cars were parked there, and one thing you were always advised to do, and that if you were fortunate to have a sunroof on your car, was to close it. And you'd think, why? Because it had been a known fact that people, whoever, would flick out the cigarette and then just throw it across the roof of the car. Hence, it would go into your car, and it was known that some magistrates ended up with a seat burnt by the cigarettes. So we were always advised, make sure your car was safe and secure, as they say today. I must admit, when I look back, there was two magistrates who were very strong on fine enforcement, and that would be Derek Phillips and Ken Brumfitt. And they would go into court, and no sooner had proceedings started, and you would see others who were waiting through the little glass windows at the back. You'd see little faces poking up and jumping over, and they'd go, oh my God, it's so-and-so, so-and-so, so-and-so. And I can assure you, they were very thorough. So somebody'd say, got no money, and before you realise it, they'd ask you, do you smoke? And whether you said yes or no, so well, let's have a look in your pockets, any cigarettes, and do you drink? And they'd soon, how much do you drink? Have you got a car? Yeah. What do you use it for? Work and everything. They would do what we do today very quickly and work out whether there was sufficient funds there and that you were being negligent in not paying the fine as required. And I can assure you, the fines were all paid up, or a commitment was made by each and every one of them before they left the building. Right, after all that, I'm ready for a cup of tea, so if I can find the kettle and the plug still, I'm on my way. I'll be back shortly.